Hello there and welcome back to my channel. Today I am so excited to introduce you my latest pattern, the beret hat. Berets have been a classic fashion statement for decades and I've always loved their effortless elegance. But for this one I wanted to add a little twist, a modern touch, a bit more playfulness, and of course an optional bow for those who love a little extra detail. Don't worry if bows aren't your thing, you can totally skip that part and keep it sleek and simple. This pattern comes in 5 sizes, so you can make the perfect fit for yourself or give it as a gift. And the best part, it is a super quick sew. Seriously, you can put this together in no time. Perfect for when you want a fun little project that doesn't take up your whole day. What I love most about this pattern is how versatile it is. You can use different fabrics for different looks. It's also fully lined, which means the inside looks just as neat and polished as the outside. I'll be walking you through the step-by-step tutorial, showing you everything from creating your bias tape to assembling the beret and even adding the bow detail if you want to. So grab your fabrics and let's get started.
I'm using main fabric, lining fabric, and additional fabric for the bow and bias tape. You can make your own bias tape from the same fabric, and now I'll show you how. I'm laying my fabric flat and using the selvage edges as a guide to create a 50 by 50 cm square. You can also create a larger or smaller square if you prefer. Adjust the size based on how much bias tape you need for your project. I place my ruler right at the corner and position it diagonally to create a 45-degree line across to the opposite corner. After I draw my line, I follow to cut along it. Now I take this edge, flip it, and align it with the opposite edge. Once they lined up, I'll pin the entire edge. After pinning, I sew it with a 0.5 cm seam allowance. Once it's sewn, I lay the entire piece flat and press the seam allowances open with an iron. Now, I mark my preferred bias tape width using an erasable pencil. For this project, I need at least 4 cm wide bias tape to fully cover the 1 cm seam allowance, but you can make it wider depending on your aesthetic preference. Using my ruler, I continue drawing parallel lines each 4 cm apart going upwards. Since my ruler is a bit short, my lines are also short, so I extend them carefully. Some of them don't match up perfectly, but I regulate them as much as possible to create straight, continuous lines. This last piece is extra, so I simply cut it off. Now I flip my fabric over and align the 2 diagonal edges. Here is the important part. You want to line up the first line at the one edge with the second line at the other. the second line at the first edge with the third line at the other, and so on. Make sure these two lines intersect half a centimeter in from the edge, not right at the edge, and pin accordingly. When you are done pinning, there will be a small triangle at each end. Now, sew along the pinned edge with a half a centimeter seam allowance. Once it's sewn, press the seam allowances open with an iron. Since I used a heat-raisable pen, my lines disappeared. I can still faintly see them, but I'm going to retrace them so they are more visible on camera. Now, starting from one of the triangles on the outer edge, follow the lines and cut all the way through to the other side. I sometimes go off the line, but try to cut as neatly as possible. And there you have it. One long continuous strip of bias tape. This is way more than I need for this project, but I can save the extra for future sewing projects. With this method, you can create bias tape from any fabric in any width you like. Now you can cut and prepare all your pieces. You can check the table in the How many pieces to cut section in the sewing instructions manual to see how many pieces you need to cut from each fabric. And of course, don't forget to clip your notches. We'll start by joining the two crown pieces with their right sides together by sewing along one of the short edges with a 1 cm seam allowance. The standard seam allowance for this pattern is 1 cm and it is already included. Now for the other two crown pieces. Again, align the edges with their right sides together and sew with a 1 cm seam allowance just as before. Since the edges are curved, clip small triangles into the seam allowance to prevent bulkiness. Press the seam allowances open to both sides. This will help your seams look clean and crisp from the outside. Now there's a notch at the center of the crown pieces where it will attach to the top piece, and there are none at the bottom. I'm marking it with a heat-raisable pen for better visibility, and I'm doing this on all pieces. This is how I know these edges are top edges. Now, Place these two crown pieces with their right sides together. Make sure to align the edges and sew along both short edges with a 1 cm seam allowance. This is how it should look once sewn. Again, clip small triangles into the seam allowance to reduce bulk. Press the seam allowances open to both sides again. After these steps, you should have a complete circular shape, meaning the crown assembly is now finished. The top piece has 8 notches. These are crucial for aligning and attaching a circular piece correctly. Again, I'm marking them to make it more visible. Start by aligning one of the seam lines on the crown with any of the notches on the top piece. The next notch on the top piece should be matched with the notch at the center of the crown, and so on. The notch on the top piece will be matched with a seam line and pinned together. The following notch on the top piece should be aligned with the notch at the middle of the crown. Continue aligning and pinning each notch on the top piece to the corresponding seam lines and notches on the crown. Sew around the entire circular edge with a 1 cm seam allowance. Just like before, clip small triangles into the seam allowance to prevent bulkiness. Press the seam allowances open, directing one toward the top piece and the other toward the crown. This will create a smooth and professional finish. Now we'll repeat all the steps for the lining fabric, sewing the crown and top pieces together. But before that, I want to do something extra. I'm marking the top edge of the crown piece and adding a small line near the bottom edge, making sure it will not be covered by the bias tape. Since my Singer machine has a lettering function, I'm stitching my name inside the hat. Just a little personal touch to make it feel extra special. A tiny detail, but it makes it truly mine. I'm trimming the loose threads between the letters using a small pair of scissors. From this point on, every single step is exactly the same as what we did for the main fabric. Just follow the same process to sew your lining. Main fabric one should be right side out and lining one should be wrong side out. Place the lining inside the main fabric one. Ensure that the seam lines are aligned. Match and pin them together. And do this for all of the seam lines. And also match and pin all of the edges of both layers together all around. Sew along the entire edge for 5 mm in to join the two layers. This is how it should look once finished. Like I said earlier, seam allowance for this pattern is 1 cm. So the bias tape should be at least 4 cm wide to fully enclose the seam allowance. We'll attach the bias tape to the lining side first. Choose any seam line as a reference point. Mark a point 3 cm to the left and right of the seam line using a heat erasable pen. Leaving a 7-8 cm tail at the beginning, start pinning the bias tape from the mark 3 cm to the right of the seam line. Align the raw edge of the bias tape with the raw edge of the fabric, making sure the right side of the tape is facing the right side of the lining. At the mark 3 cm to the left of the seam line, place your final pin and cut the bias tape, again leaving a 7-8 cm tail. Start sewing from your first pin and sew until your last pin. After sewing around the entire edge with a 1 cm seam allowance, it should look like this. Place a pin vertically along the unsewn seam line to use as a guide. Bring one end of the bias tape to this pin and mark where they meet. Do the same with the other end, marking where they meet. Pin the bias tape ends together where you drew your markings. Just be careful not to catch the head itself. Sew a straight stitch along the pinned mark so that this seam aligns perfectly with the head's side seam. Trim the excess fabric, leaving a 1 cm seam allowance. As you can see, the right side of the binding is touching the lining and it fits perfectly. Open the seam allowances with your fingers and sew the remaining gap closed with a 1 cm seam allowance. Turn the head right side out. Now we'll fold the bias tape over to cover the seam allowance on the main fabric side. Fold the bias tape by 1 cm first, then fold it again by another 1 cm. This will neatly enclose the seam allowance and create a clean finish. Pin as you fold to keep it in place. Continue pinning all around the head by folding the bias tape twice. Place the pins about 2-3 mm from the edge of the bias tape. Just Always make sure they come out exactly at the seam line where the lining and bias tape meet on the back. This way, when you sew along where the pins are placed, the stitches will stay hidden on the back, blending seamlessly into the seam line. Where you joint the bias tape, leave a 3-4 cm opening. This is where we'll place and attach the tack piece. Except for the small opening you left, sew the bias tape to the head, stitching 2-3 mm in from the edge of the tape. If you don't want to attach the ball to your hat, skip leaving an opening and sew the bias tape all around to complete your hat at this stage. As you can see, the seam is nearly visible on the back, except for a few tiny spots. We have an opening here for our tack piece. Shorter ones are the tack pieces, so grab them. My fabric looks the same on both sides, so I'm writing back on one side to make it easier to distinguish. Place the pieces with their right sides together and sew in a U shape, leaving one short edge open. Clip the corners, getting as close as possible to the seam without cutting through it. This will help prevent bulkiness when you turn it right side out. Trim all edges, leaving about 5 mm from the stitching line. Turn the piece right side out. Use a stick or pencil to push out the corners as much as possible and press with an iron. Insert the raw edge of the tack piece securely into the small opening you left on the bias tape, aligning with the raw edge of the hat. Pin the tack piece in place and sew the opening closed, ensuring that the tack piece is securely attached. Now, while the tack piece is pointing towards the top of the hat, flip it over so that it faces the bottom. Sew a short securing stitch to keep it in place in this position. Now for the bow pieces. I'm writing back on one side to make it easier to distinguish again. Place the pieces with their right sides together. Mark a 4 cm opening in the middle of one of the long edges. Sew all the edges except for the small opening you left. Clip the corners, getting as close as possible to the seam without cutting through it. Trim all the edges, leaving about 5 mm from the stitching line, except for the edge with the opening. Fold one layer of the seam allowance we didn't trim upwards. Flip the piece and similarly fold the other layer of the untrimmed seam allowance upwards again. Press it so when you turn the piece right side out through the opening, the seam allowance will stay neatly inside. Turn the piece right side out through the opening. Use a chopstick or pencil again to make them as sharp as possible. Press it with an iron so that it looks crisp and neat. Sew the remaining opening closed from the right side. To close this opening, stitch as close to the edge as possible, about 1-2 mm from the edge. To make our bow, fold the piece in half from the center. Then fold both long edges inward so that they align with the center fold line. This will turn our rectangle into something that resembles a bow. Pin it in the middle and sew a small securing stitch along the edges of the pleats to hold the bow shape in place. It is the tiniest of the stitches. Now press it right at the center to make it more stable. Place the bow on the hat, centering it over the tag piece and positioning it on top of the bias binding. Pin it in couple places and sew the bow piece onto the hat by stitching straight down the middle. Once the bow piece is sewn, it should look like this. And with that, your hat is finished. As mentioned before, the tag and bow pieces are completely optional, and there is no single way to sew a bow. Feel free to customize your hat however you like. If you found this tutorial helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more sewing projects. And if you make this beret, tag me. I love to see your versions. Thanks for watching and happy sewing!